because I was trying to prove that I belonged in America, I was American enough, I almost had to reject anything that was not American about me. I couldn't say and be proud of being African, Congolese, Zambian. I had to reject that so that I could prove that I was American enough. I love America. I'm national. I have nationalism. So I hate everything else about me.
Okay, so thank you for tuning in, first of all, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on anything. Now, this next conversation I want to share with you guys, it's different from the last one, of course. They can't all be the same, but it's just as unique, and it's very interesting. The person that I had the pleasure of speaking with, it just has a very touching story, and I think there's something for everyone. I won't say anything else. I'm going to be splitting this conversation into several sections that are easier to digest, but I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. So right now I'm giving you guys the entire conversation. Now, before I let you guys listen to the conversation, there's this beautiful thing that she says, and it is that it is very important for people to be able to share their stories. And I want to thank you for listening, and I also want to invite you to share because the more people that can be reached, the more weight that can be put behind these stories. Because I mean, if nobody's listening, it's hard to justify your sharing your own story. Now, also take your time listening to everything, because there's a lot of depth to everything that is being said, and I wouldn't want you to miss out on anything. So I hope you enjoy. Today we are speaking with Martine Kalaw.
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 Okay, like I don't know if you've ever eaten like bacalao.
Yes.
So bacalao, calao, like that.
Kalaw. Bacalao. Perfect. Perfect.
Yes.
And so you
I
are.
would say, author, immigration advocate, and speaker, keynote speaker.
And
Yeah,
most importantly, you're a human being. And
exactly.
so today's conversation is, well, for me, what I'm seeking out of this is a conversation about the dreamer's experience. And my understanding is that you consider yourself to be a dreamer.
Absolutely. Yes. I mean, the way the definition for dreamer is any child that came to the US with a parent. Um, I think the average age is 6. So anywhere between the age of infancy, I think the average, not the average, but till the age of about 10. And then the average of that is about 6 years old. And so I came with my mother from to the United States on a visitor's visa and then became undocumented, which is what is typical of many of us dreamers. And although I've survived this journey, it was the bulk of my life experience, and I feel very connected to my community as a dreamer, as a advocate for other dreamers, whether it's personal or even on a political platform.
It's great to have that identity and to have a community that you can connect to on it's a different level of connection when
Yeah,
you've had to go through similar experiences, and those experiences happen to be, well, this impactful because they are powerful experiences.
yeah,
Okay, so first of all, I want to talk about your project. This project, you wrote a memoir
yeah,
that details your experience, right?
yeah.
So how did you come to decide that you needed to or you wanted to share your story?
Right. So my memoir is entitled Illegal Among Us, A Stateless Woman's Quest for Citizenship. So I was, for many years of my life, I was undocumented. And before that euphemism of undocumented, we were just referred to as being illegal. So I was undocumented for 11 years. I was in removal proceedings. That's another euphemism for deportation proceedings for 7 years. I was fighting for my life and not to not end up in a detention center. because I was also stateless, so I didn't have a country to go back to. I never had a passport. I never had those things that people consider to be identifiers. And so for me, I started off writing this book because I really thought that I was going to end up in a detention facility indefinitely. And I was going to be like the thousands of horrific stories we're hearing about every day in America. I believe that was going to be me, specifically because I was stateless. I didn't have a country to go back to. And also because I was an orphan, so I didn't have family either. So I just thought that I needed to write my story because there was no proof that I ever did in America if I didn't share my story. And I just believe that if I just wrote it down on paper, then there would be evidence to shame the US government, even if I didn't make it. Because I really didn't think I was going to. And I wanted to shame the US government and shame them for allowing this kind of thing to happen in America. And I wanted Americans to know that this kind of thing is happening in America. And I think the saddest part about all of this is that we are seeing this exacerbated on another level right now, and it's still happening. Like, I can't believe it's only getting worse. And it's like the, I don't know what is going on with our country today that there's this level of, I think the American public is angry and it's outraged, but our government isn't responding to our outrage. And so that is what is so scary and shocking to me. Anyway, I can go on about that, but that was
So
my
how
motivation for
how
writing.
old were you? How old were you when you started? You said this was a 7 year period when you were
Yeah.
fighting. How old were you when this started?
I became undocumented when I was placed in removal proceedings when I think I was 19 years old. And then I finally got my green card when I was 26 years old.
26. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, well, you were 19 years old, so you were old enough to be able to understand the situation. How old were you when you first understood that? So, you were not from the US,
Yeah.
and you weren't an illegal until you were 19. Did you ever think about that, being an outsider, or I don't know what
Well,
to call it?
technically, I learned that I was undocumented. I became quote unquote illegal when I was 15, when my mother had died and my stepfather died previously because my status, was no longer, my status ran out years ago when I was a child, I guess, because I overstayed my visa. I was a minor, so how would I have known?
Yeah.
However, there was wiggle room apparently because my mom was a permanent resident and my stepfather was a U.S. foreign citizen. So when they both died, apparently I had a window of time. But Ivan, the thing that I want to just kind of bring you into is my space and my world, especially back then. My mother, I watched my stepfather and my mother die of HIV and full blown AIDS. I was their caretaker. I was a child. I was 15 years old when my whole life was pulled from under me, and so for me, it was about survival. The last thing I was thinking about was, am I American? Like that never occurred to me. I grew up in the United States. I went to school with other American children. I spoke English. Of course, I didn't speak English at home, but when I was outside my home, I spoke English. I was here since I was 4 years old. I grew up in the United States. I came here when I was four. So it never occurred to me that I was anything other than being American. This was my home. I didn't know any other home. So it never registered. Am I American? I was American. The only time I knew that, okay, I knew I was an immigrant because when I went home, we ate different foods. We spoke different languages. My mother talked about her homeland. I knew that I was born somewhere else, but it was this foreign place that I'd never actually been to. I couldn't even picture it, right? And that was my reality. So I was very much American. And it was only after my mother died that I was tossed from one relative's home to another for a series of a couple of
Okay.
years.
So you didn't go into the foster care system.
No, I mean, it was a blessing and a curse in a lot of ways because the US foster care system is one of the most horrific experiences and things that I could imagine.
There are
Um,
plenty of stories about
yeah,
that. Yeah.
absolutely. But at the same time, I experienced abuse and neglect in my relatives' home. So it's like a double-edged sword. It wasn't necessarily better off. However, the blessing was that strangers entered my life, and out of the goodness and the kindness of their heart, helped me get into boarding school. So when I got into boarding school, that's when I was safe. Okay, when I was because I no longer had to
Depend
live
on these
on
people.
time. Exactly. I basically became an emancipated minor. So
At what age did
I,
this happen?
I was 16 and a half. I was pretty much on my own. And the boarding school said, we do not want you to go back to your home. We think that we know there's abuse going on, and it would not sit well um, for us to let you go back. And that was my saving grace. That was truly my saving grace. And because I finally felt like I was safe, I was in a safe space, but albeit I felt, I mean, I was this poor African girl going to this private school with a lot of very wealthy people, students,
A lot
but
of
it
white faces, I imagine.
yeah, but actually in the dorms, the private school was mostly predominantly white. But what was amazing about the dorms, it was international,
Mm.
right? So all the students were from all over the world. So I grew up in this safe haven where we were all equal. Is the first time and only time in my life that I've been in this microcosm where I felt that I was exactly equal to everyone else. Because if you think about it, none of us had parents in the boarding school, right? We were
Yeah.
all just kids without parents in the boarding school. So I didn't feel weird. I didn't have to explain that I didn't have parents because none of us had our parents there. We were all technically international in a way. We
You
were.
were American, and nobody ever saw you as anything other than
Yeah,
American.
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, when you hear my name, Martine Kalaw, you know that that's obviously, there's some history there that is not American. But otherwise, I was just like another boarder, and I was another dorm student, and that is where I felt most safe, most comfortable. I didn't even worry about the fact that I was poor because it just seemed like within the climate of being on the dorms,
It's a protected environment.
yes, because of the environment, we were all equal in that way. It wasn't, of course, some of us obviously had more money than others, but because of the environment we were in, it was less obvious.
Yeah,
And
you
so,
didn't need to be showing that. You didn't have opportunities to be showing your
yeah,
status per se.
exactly. So when I look back in my whole entire life history and even where I am today, honestly, those 2 years in boarding school were the most pivotal because it was the first time and only time where I truly felt 100% equal to everyone around me. And we were all like, just, we were a posse, It was amazing.
It can seem like it's obviously a beautiful thing to hear to listen to somebody talk about a time when they felt accepted. But what's important to point out is that for people who are going through this experience, finding these moments where you feel accepted and you feel like you belong is very hard. It's very
It's
hard.
rare. It's rare. I mean, I know that I am, I mean, people have called me lucky. I say it's luck. Sometimes it's randomness of life. But it's also, I believe, it's what you decide to do with the opportunities that are presented to you and recognizing that there are opportunities. Sometimes those opportunities come in very um, subtle ways, right?
Or they may
And
even seem negative. They may even feel negative.
And so, what I do when I work with my community, when I mentor others, is allowing them to be ready or to recognize those minuscule opportunities and turning them into something bigger, And so it really starts from a place of empowerment. But what many of us experience in this space because we're being told everywhere we look that we don't exist, that we're, less valuable, we're not human, we're aliens, we're illegal, all these things.
How have we come to accept that term?
Exactly. And then the psyche, this truly, I mean, when you hear this over and over and over again, I don't care who you are, somewhere within you, you start to believe it. And so it's degrading, it's demoralizing, and it's the breaking down of the self. And so
But
what
you
I want
feel
to
like there's
do,
something to be ashamed of.
yeah,
I personally, I had to hide my identity. You know, I came to the U.S. when I was, well, I went to the U.S. I'm not in the U.S. anymore, but when I was 11 years old. So
yeah,
I was old enough, and so there were some challenges, and I was poor and all these things, and I didn't go to a boarding school, so there was, you know, I could see clearly that I was the bottom of the barrel. Not only was I poor, but I was an illegal, and everybody made it very clear that illegal aliens were like to be hunted. I was in
yeah.
California, and there were raids all the time. My family was afraid all the time. So,
Wow.
yes, it's extreme in the sense that you can destroy an individual just by labeling them that way.
And the mental, I mean, I know, and I'm very honest in my and it's in talks I give in my book about the mental health component for some of us. I mean, I think this is a space where, you know, we don't talk enough about that. I know that I dealt with severe depression because when you I think people fail to recognize that when someone ends up undocumented, illegal, whatever, think about the circumstances in which they came from. If they were willing to put themselves in the situation that they are, it must have been much harder where they were, right? Whatever circumstance. So they're carrying that on top of now this new identity.
Oh, I think I lost you. There we
Yeah, there
go.
we go. Okay, good.
So we left off.
Oh, we were talking about mental health.
Yes.
And I was saying that, with in this space, um, when we think about like no one, I think we often the media and anyone who's talking about immigration, illegal immigration, and undocumented immigrants, they often overlook the part where the journey before we become undocumented. We overlook that part. If anyone is willing to get to a place where they're in another country and they're undocumented and they're willing to deal with the scrutiny, the struggle, you have to consider where they came from. It must not have been that much better where they came from. So
Well,
they're carrying that emotion, that journey, that baggage on top of now this new baggage where we are demoralizing them, we're telling them they're bad people, we're shaming them, we're criminalizing them. And so the combination of that world and that story compiled with this story, that's enough to break a person. And that's what happened to me. It
yeah.
almost broke me. So I talk about mental health a lot, especially in my story. I talk about my battle with depression. I also talk about my several attempts of suicide because I just felt like, what more? I have like everyone hates me. I'm a bad person. I'm told that I'm not human. I'm told that I don't deserve to be here. I'm told that I'm not a human being. And then I understand the reads because around 9/11, I remember friends telling me to hide, don't be seen, stay in your house. So then I was a fugitive on top of that. And for some of us, I know that just I didn't have the strength that some of us, other of us have. So it was very hard for me. And so I went to the darkest places that one could possibly go. And I talk about that because that's very real as well.
There's one thing that I'll say before there's something else I want to say, but this, what you mentioned about if people are willing to go through all this struggle to get to the US, to get to not just the US, but when people make this journey to immigrate, to migrate to another country, there might be some trouble, but regardless of what the world is that they're coming from, respecting the decisions that other people make is very important. We
Yeah.
must I mean, as human beings, we should be able to not question other people's choices in this way. We're basically telling them, it's okay that you don't understand. It's okay that you don't understand why people would do this, why people would risk their lives, why people would go to a country even though they're going to be undocumented, they're going to be second class citizens. You don't have to understand it, but you need to respect those decisions and just look at them as human beings, as what they are, and
Who
that's
you are.
it. And
Yeah.
that's it. Yes, because we are surprised human beings.
Yeah.
Yes. And now, what I wanted to say to point out what you said about the media and how they talk about these people. um, it, I think the media exploit these things because, well, they can. We'll talk about conservative media. They can, and they know that it'll get the viewers excited. That's what they want. Now, the media just does their part. But now on the other side, the people, as human beings, people, we need to do more to let people know the harm that they are creating. It's not helpful to see in the media, but if they weren't demanding, if there wasn't a demand for this point of view, then it wouldn't be showing up on TV. But yet there are these people that just get turned on. I'm sorry, I have no other better
Yeah.
way to
Yeah.
say it, by hearing people saying, "Oh, these animals coming across the border, look at them," or whatever. We need to educate the public on just basic human things like respect.
Yeah. I would argue that it's educating, um, and we need to do it. I agree, and it's through our own narratives, are taking control of our stories. Right now, other people are owning our stories, right? So that's why it's so great to be speaking with you, because here you are having written your own story, right? You took ownership of your story. It's your story to tell. It shouldn't be the story of whatever news channel, whatever, to tell your story the way you want to tell it. And I am mirroring you because I've done the same, and that's so important. And you're right, because the media oftentimes will sensationalize things because that's how they get viewership, right? That's a business, and we have to remember that. And so what I've observed is that there are always two stories that the media portrays when it comes to undocumented immigrants. It is the subhuman undocumented immigrant, right? The person that's a menace to society, and they're selling drugs and killing people and all this stuff that I just think is just, I mean, it's not reflective of the actual population. It's not, right? Because then one could say the same thing about America, right? I mean, you're in Spain. It, we could, the Spanish media can sensationalize Americans and say, "Oh, Americans, they're this and that," and we tell one story of one American, and that's the story of all Americans,
Yeah.
right? So that's one narrative that I hear. It's this subhuman, like this awful human being, and then the other is a superhuman, right? The person who's like, they deserve to be here because they are like a neurosurgeon, or they would have been, and they got a 7.5 GPA. Of course, I'm exaggerating. There's a thing as a 7.5, but they're so smart. And it makes the rest of us almost invisible, because if I'm not this and I'm not that, I'm just a human being. I don't matter.
Yeah.
And so that was part of the reason, that I wrote my story, my memoir, and I speak out, because I am the face that you don't see attached to this conversation. I am a voice that you don't hear attached to this conversation. And I think the more of us who speak, right, that don't look like what people think, the more we can open people's eyes of, oh my gosh, these people are human. They're
Sitting in
human
the middle.
beings.
Yeah, they're
Who
there sitting in the middle and they're fine. They're
Yeah,
okay.
and they're human beings who just ended up in circumstances like I could potentially end up in a circumstance like that, like you could, like you could, like you could. Oh, this is just a circumstance that one ends up being in. The same way someone could end up having a medical diagnosis that is, not favorable. And well, all medical diagnoses are not favorable, but same way that someone could be diagnosed with something, right? These are situations that it's part of, for some of us, it's part of our human experience. And so if we could just get people to connect with the humanity in all of us, I think that's a start. In addition to what you said, which was educating the people. But there's only so much education will, there's only so far education will go, as long as someone still sees me as being not human.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
if they don't see me like them and they don't see any connection that we have,
It goes
then it
deep.
doesn't matter how much they're educated. They don't see me as a person, so it doesn't matter.
I think that's a great way to put it. I mean, I think everything you're saying is great. Um, so I I decided to leave the U.S. I had been planning to leave the U.S. for a long time, but it's like I saw it like committing suicide, and I'm sorry. This I know you had your experiences where I had my own experience where I got to that point. I mean, I can't say that I understand what you went through because all experiences are different, but
Yeah.
it was like committing suicide in the sense that I was separating myself from everything, and I knew that if I left the U.S., I wasn't going to be able to go back. Most likely I wasn't going to be able to go back. That's the narrative that is told. You
Yeah.
leave the U.S. and it's over. And
Can't.
so I was
Yeah.
leaving all my family behind, and so it was a difficult choice to make. But the reason I always considered this was because I was tired. You know, all human beings face pressures from society. We all do. We all are told that we need to do something with our lives, that we need to shoot for the moon. There are all these things, get a good job, get good grades, all these pressures. Now, on top of that, you add the fact that you are a second class citizen. That everywhere you go, there was a point where I lost my DACA permit, and I was still applying for jobs. I was still working, and the first time they told me that I couldn't get a job because of my social security number, that's when I broke. I was like, there's no other person that I know, there's no other friend or within my environment that would be told no at a job just because of something like that, a number, you know, and that broke me. And I, this kind of leads to the next part. So you told me about a place where you felt like you belonged. You felt like. And now, what experiences have you had, or what has been the most powerful experience that you've had where you felt or you were made to feel like you did not belong?
It's a great question. Before I answer that, I just want to acknowledge that, I'm glad that I appreciate you talking about your DACA permit expiring, because I think, especially now, we're going into elections. And one of the things I tell the American public when they say, "Hey, Martine, what can we do?" I say, make sure that you ask and you demand that these candidates are explaining specifically what they're going to do in the area of immigration. For them to say something sweeping like, "Yeah, we're going to change immigration laws, policies, so everyone can come here," like, that is not, I could say that. You could say that tomorrow, right?
It's what they
What's your
say.
plan?
It's what has always been said.
Right, right. And the other thing I say is, I need you guys to understand and challenge them with anything around dreamers, because what they make it sound like is like DACA is like the answer. DACA is not a path to citizenship. It
We
is
we
temporary.
will talk about that. We will
Okay.
talk about
Okay.
that.
Cool. All right. Give me one. So, in terms of what you were saying, in terms of what spaces in which, what was the question again? Sorry.
So, a situation where you felt or you were made to feel like you did not belong, like
Yes.
that was not your home, like the U.S. was not the place for you to be.
Yes, all the time. I mean, throughout my undocumented journey, I happened to be in a courtroom with an immigration judge who, he had it out for me. He did not. I mean, he had one of the worst reputations in the immigration space, and unfortunately, there are 54 judges across the U.S. immigration judges, and I mean, the number is minuscule compared to the number of undocumented immigrants that are being pushed through the system. I mean, there's over 700,000 person backlog in immigration court
Which is
cases.
a big issue in and of itself.
And so right now, immigration judges are being appointed um, just at random. It almost seems like it's haphazardly because these judges are being appointed from being lawyers and not immigration lawyers specifically, right? So you can be a lawyer, a tax lawyer. I'm just hypothetically saying, and then tomorrow you get appointed to being an immigration judge because there's a shortage. That's very scary. And then to add on top of that, you're then given a quota of how many people you have to get through your courtroom. So, you know, it really sets it up um, for injustice to happen in that courtroom. And so, to answer your question, it's a very long answer to your question. I experienced that every time I walked into that courtroom. I had this judge tell me that I deserved to be deported, that I was a horrible person, that I was a liar, that he didn't care what happened to me. I mean, he would just. It's almost like he hated me and whatever I represented. It just sickened him. And he had the power to say whatever he wanted in the courtroom. And I had to just sit there and take it.
Yeah,
And I
what?
had,
Yeah, you listen. You can't talk back.
what can you do? And so you hear that over and over and over again, like you're awful human being, you're
And it
awful.
was just the type of comments that they make when they generalize, you know, when because I mean I've experienced this where suddenly they're talking to you like they're talking to the group, and I'm
Yes.
thankful that the type of racism that I experienced was not directed at me as a person, as Ivan Gutierrez. It was directed as the group that I belong to, you know.
Yeah.
So that's
And I
how
think that's
they
a
he
really
was.
important thing to consider. I like that acknowledgement because I know I've experienced it on racism, xenophobia on various levels, whether it's the person, my body, right, the body I stand in, but then also the groups that I'm associated with, and sometimes the groups that people assume I'm associated with, right? They don't know. And so I feel like I've always existed within this space, which now we call it intersectionality, which I love that term because it's very
Would you
powerful.
mind explaining the term?
So the term intersectionality, I think it was introduced by the immigrant community in the last couple of years, which is saying that it's okay to exist in multiple spaces and own all those spaces. So an example would be, and I'm sure maybe you can relate, because I was trying to prove that I belonged in America, I was American enough, I almost had to reject anything that was not American about me. I couldn't say and be proud of being African, Congolese, Zambian. I had to reject that so that I could prove that I was American enough. I love America. I have nationalism. So I hate everything else about me except just being American, right? So the term intersectionality says you can embrace all those parts and still own being part of each of them. Martine, you can embrace being African, but guess what? You can still be American while you accept being African as well. But that's not the story that many of us experience as undocumented immigrants. We're forced to reject everything else because if we don't assimilate and acculturate completely, then we don't deserve to be in America. That's what I hear, and that's what I heard. So that's one of the things I dealt with, which was okay, yeah, I can't even try to explore this other part of me, but at the same time, that's all people see. They look at me, they don't look at me and think I'm American. I've never actually, and I don't know why, I've never had anyone, well, I've had some people, but most people, and this is exclusive of race, look at me, they don't say, oh, you're American. They go, where are you from? All
You
the time,
from?
all the
Yeah.
time. And so the other part of this is even when I became a US citizen in 2012, no, it was yeah, 2013, I thought, okay, now I am free from having to explain myself, free from having to justify who I am. I can just be.
Yeah.
However, I can't just be because I'm in this body, a black female, my skin tone, all of these things. just it I don't know why people feel the need to question and they cannot accept me being in this body as being American. It
It,
doesn't matter that I'm now a US citizen. So
well,
that's the other piece.
that need, and I mean, I thank you. That need to, well, to question people's just existence. You know, who are you? What are you? You know, well, come on, you're looking at me. I'm a human. I'm a human, right?
Right.
Let's have a conversation. I've had I had an interaction with the person at one point where I became upset after having a long conversation with this person, a pleasant conversation. At the end of the night, when I had a few drinks, I became upset because he would just not let that go. He would just not let the fact of my status of who I was, an immigrant. He just would not let it go, and I told him, instead of sitting here stuck in this. Oh, I think I lost you.
Uh-oh, sorry.
There you are. Okay. Stuck in this, I don't know, this state of questioning my identity. We could be having a true human connection. We be just having that, but you chose to get stuck in just looking at the fact that I'm different or that my circumstances might be different.
Right.
It's okay to find a person interesting. If you look at me, you're like, oh, well, he looks exotic, I might be interested by that. It's kind of racist, obviously, but yeah, but I won't immediately say that that's malice, that that's evil
Right.
behind that.
Sometimes it comes from a very innocent
It's just,
place.
yeah, it's ignorance isn't always bad, it's just, it is what it is. But we need to make sure that we're acknowledging that how are we interacting with people? How do we want people, what do we want human interaction to mean? We need to have that established so that we're not putting people into the situations. Even when you come to the point where you think that it doesn't mean anything to you, suddenly you meet someone at a bar and they make you feel uncomfortable. Why are we still making each other feel uncomfortable?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. But I would argue it's because it's our own discomfort with our own identities. And so we project that out on others. And so I believe it's a safety mechanism. I do because I see it when people do it. And I think it's more common now that I do more traveling across the world now that I have a passport. Um, I noticed that it's particularly prevalent in the US. There's a need to compartmentalize people in a box. I don't know why. And it happens. I see it all the time. If it's not race, it's socioeconomic. I mean, it's the type of questions people ask you. Where do you live? What do you do? Right? It's like, okay, you're trying to make these associations. And
And,
I think it's particularly prevalent in the US. I
but,
just haven't noticed it as much when I travel. And it maybe it's
yeah.
because I'm a tourist traveling, but
Because it's everywhere. It's everywhere.
yeah,
I think that there are places where maybe it's not the case because people just don't you don't get to that point. For example, I went to visit people in Mexico, and I'm from a poor part of Mexico, and when you're in that section of the population, whether it's in the U.S. or whatever, people are a little bit interested in that, and they kind of relax. But we get to a point where all those things seem to matter a little bit more.
yeah,
What you do for a job, what is your profession, suddenly, there are little ideas that matter to certain people, and that's everywhere. Western culture, or just society in general, we've given importance to certain aspects of our existence, like education and those things. So that's the first thing they pop out,
mhm,
which is hard. It's like I was sitting at a table, and a person next to me didn't know much about etiquette at the table, so I could see that she felt uncomfortable. And I'm like, man, this is fucking terrible. Not knowing which fork to use for what thing shouldn't be a reason for somebody to feel uncomfortable. The color of our skin shouldn't be a reason for us to feel uncomfortable. It's like I I know that It's an issue because it's as simple as not knowing which fork to use, but it's as complicated as, well, this,
Yeah.
how do we view each other,
That's right.
without, yeah. Well, let's see. I have this. I want to talk about DACA. I know you never got it, but you probably know enough about it, being an advocate.
Yeah.
What I want to do is I want to read you a little something, and then you just give me your opinion on it. All right? All right. So it seems wrong for the US to be charging a membership fee into the second class citizens club that is DACA, especially since their way of justifying this act is by stating the fact that these people broke the law. If this is what they believe to be fair, then surely Native Americans would be living in castles, considering that this country broke a lot of laws in, well, genocide and all these things. So, well, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's right on. Whoever wrote that it's beautiful. Did you write that?
I read that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think, yes, I think that the most effective way to illustrate a point is to actually create that sort of that analogy, that metaphor. And that's exactly what you did with Native Americans. So that is exactly what DACA is. It's like this sort of second class citizenship saying, we're not going to really give you anything, but we're just going to keep you quiet and satisfied for a minute. But we benefit because we're collecting the money. So every couple of years, you have to spend, I don't know what the fee is now. It's like 600 or is it
Yeah,
five?
I think it's like
Yeah,
between
right.
4 and 6. Yeah.
Exactly. And we're not sure if you're going to get it. So I think that's what people don't realize, that not just with DACA, with when you think about all these different relief programs, they're not free. I think people forget that. Like when you're applying for any of these types of reliefs, anything around immigration, none of it is free, compiled with sometimes you need an attorney. And yes, you might be able to get a pro bono attorney, but even that, there are fees, sometimes hidden fees associated with that. So absolutely, I could not agree more that one, DACA is not a path to citizenship. It's temporary and it's very limited. I'm not gonna you know, one, I'm grateful that it exists because it's something, but it's like someone who's impoverished and has no food, and then they're given you know bad meat, meat that's gone bad for. I mean, they'll take it, they'll eat it because it's something, but you know what I mean. That's kind of how I see DACA, and you know it one it not all dreamers qualify for DACA. The only reason that it's not that I didn't choose DACA, it's that I didn't qualify. I missed the age requirement by 5 months, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's important that I wish your story and my story around DACA was more obvious to the media, and more recognized, because I think, like I said, a lot of elected officials or politicians are running for elections. They're using the term DACA, 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 like throwing it out like it's the answer. And what the public is doing is, because they don't hear stories like yours and mine, they're like, yes, DACA is a solution. And this person's gonna have sign, reinstate DACA. Great. No, it doesn't offer a solution. Really, it's temporary, and you can renew your DACA and you may not get it renewed, and you may have spent hundreds of dollars, or you may not even qualify because of some arbitrary age range that they capped it at, where you miss it by 5 months. And you know what? The reality is there are 2.9 million dreamers out there who do not qualify for DACA for various reasons, right? But I think it's important to acknowledge that. And so what you just read encapsulates all of that.
There's a point that you made of the uncertainty, not knowing whether you're going to get it or not, because you don't know. At any point, this is discretionary. Discretionary. The person going through the application can say, "Well, I'm having a bad day,"
That's
and
correct.
that's it. And you can't do anything.
That's it.
You
That's
can,
it.
that's it. That's it. You have been denied.
It's completely
And
subjective, right? It's subjective, like you said. Yes.
so you are living in a prison, this prison of second class citizenship, and then you're living in the prison of uncertainty. And it's, do you think people should feel comfortable with this program?
With DACA,
Yeah.
no, I think we need to challenge it. It's not enough. It's not good enough. It's not widespread enough. I believe that that's why I am pushing for HR 6, the Dream and Promise Act. I mean, really, if you think about it, DACA was a response to the original Dream Act not being passed. I was one of the people that testified on Capitol Hill on behalf of Congress for the original Dream Act. And that bill died. I mean, it was, it went between the House and the Senate for years and it died. And so DACA was a way to kind of shut people up a little bit, like immigration
Yeah.
organizers who were pushing and pushing and pushing and protesting. So the Obama administration was like, all right, fine, we'll give you this. It's temporary. So, right, it's not a solution. There's no solution in it. It's just a band aid. And we know what happens with band aids. There's something underlying it. It's going to keep falling off. No, we need to challenge DACA. It doesn't help us. We need something better. We deserve something better. And quite honest, because we're contributing, like DACA recipients, I think I posted like 18 DACA recipients contribute $18.1 billion to the annual taxes. Like that's a lot of money. It's a lot of money that DACA recipients are contributing. We're not even talking dreamers. We're not even talking all undocumented immigrants. DACA recipients, that's 600 or 700,000 person category. So we deserve to have something more substantial. A temporary protected status does not give us the opportunity to go to school, to work, to do all these things for the long term and to create a livelihood that we quite honestly, I believe we're entitled to because we are an American soil. This is the promise that America has made to anyone that steps on this soil. They've always made it. Why change it now? We've been doing it for hundreds of years.
It's interesting because we when you ask a person specifically, do you believe that we are all equal, that we all human beings are equal? Most people, and I'm going to leave a little bit of room for those few people. Most people will tell you yes,
Yes.
yes. Okay, so why hold this section of the population to a different standard? Why? Why does it seem appropriate to put an age limit on when you can be here? When we consider it acceptable to give you a little permit, why do you have to be a student? Why do you have to do these things? The rest of the population doesn't have to go through those hoops. So, in thinking about that, do you think people in the general population, people who are not affected by these immigration issues, do you think they think about this enough?
Well, I actually spoke at the Brookings Institution 2 weeks ago, and in doing my research before I spoke, I read that there was a march just recently, last March, a Gallup poll, where the question was to select group of individuals. Do you really? How much? What's your connection or relationship, or how much do you care about this immigration conversation? Over 40% of the responses were, I really, doesn't really affect me, so it's not something I really care about,
Yeah.
right? So there's a level of apathy, and that's one of the messages I shared at Brookings is there's this level of apathy that apparently that the American public, the general, consensus has around immigration. It's not that they're anti it; it's that it's not really affecting them directly, so they're kind of apathetic, like okay, they're not actively involved. And so our politicians, our elected officials, they're responding to that, right? For them it's about ratings, so they're responding to whatever the public cares about. The
Yeah.
public doesn't care, they don't care, right? And so yes, we have immigration organizers, we have immigrants that are speaking out, we have politicians who are speaking out because they have their own agenda. But what we now need are more allies. We need more allies. We need to get people
How do
interested.
we how do we turn a citizen that is not against immigrants, that is not a racist or a bigot or anything,
Yeah,
but is not actively involved? How do we get them to at least become
I
an
think
ally?
a couple of things. One is there's so much information out there. They don't even know where to go. Like it's kind of like it's ironic because there's so much information, but like, okay, where where can you get tangible information? Because people don't have a lot of time and they don't have enough capacity in their brains to pack in more information. And so I know, for example, with me, just looking and trying to understand the whole context of climate change, it's overwhelming. I just want to be able to go to one place where I can get just the fundamental understanding. And so I can make my own informed decision. Right now, it's the conversation around immigration, the policies, it's saturated. So people don't know where to go for the facts because there's so many. It's like, can you just tell me where I can get credible information that's digestible for me, the average person? So that's one. We need to do more of that. That's one of the things I do just on my Instagram. I have little videos and things like that, but we need more of that. I think the second thing is getting the more we tell these stories, these human stories, the more that that person sees themselves in us because they go, wait a minute, that could have been me. Wait, so you came here and your mother was a permanent resident? Wait, your stepfather was American and they died, and that's how, oh my gosh, like I didn't realize that. I thought it was, every one of you just came over the border and blah,
The
blah,
way the
blah.
Mexicans do.
Right. And with those stories, we need to humanize those stories too. We need to have individuals, we need to communicate what was their journey before they even got to where they got to, before they started to seek asylum. What was their life like at home, right? Because when people start to see that, they start to understand, they see themselves in that story. And when you start to see yourself in somebody else, you cannot, they are now a human being. They are now connected to you. I really believe that. And so
Empathy is a
if
very
we can
powerful
do
thing.
more of that and we can equip more of us to tell those stories, right? Because the media, again, they tell the story they want to tell, right? And they tell the story of us being downtrodden and broken and pathetic and all of that. But can we tell this? Can we allow ourselves to tell that story? I would it would mean so much if we could have a mother and a child, or that God rest his soul and his daughter's soul, the man, the young man and his daughter who died, who drowned in the water. And in a way, I feel like the media is almost sensationalizing that story too, and dehumanizing these two very human beings. You just see this picture of them, and I don't know that that is right either. I had a hard time when I saw that picture, and I thought, so now we're making stories about these two very human beings who are real people. They're not objects for us to look at. And I
There's a level of respect that we're not achieving in that, and I think it's unnecessary to expect this amazing story of, well, in this case, death. Death is what apparently people needed to feel something. We don't need
yes,
that. We
right,
don't need somebody to
right,
die.
exactly. And so if we can tell those stories of this is what life was like leading up to me deciding to leave, that's what we need more of. We need more of stories like my stories of people who've come out of it also. Enough of us are not speaking up. And I can understand why. It's like going back into the fire. It's
Yeah.
painful.
She's
Why
like,
would
wait, what?
you go back? It's like being a masochist. Sometimes I feel like I'm a masochist. So I know when you come out of it, you're so distraught you almost want to forget. But that's the problem. Many of us who come out of it need to tell our stories so that, because for whatever reason, sometimes when we come out of it and now we're US citizens or permanent residents, the American public then sees us as human. So then we have access, right? We can
Yeah.
liaise between these two worlds. So why wouldn't we do that?
I think, well, I might be wrong, but I think one of the reasons is a point that you mentioned earlier, where I think a lot of people feel this obligation to be extra American, and to be the thing, the
Superhuman.
patriots. Well, this thing where they adopt these views of, well, like, they have to go through the loops that I went through. It's like, well, come on, everybody doesn't have the resources.
Right.
You got what you got, and that's great. That doesn't mean you need to expect everybody to be like you, or to whatever that may be.
Right.
I see that You see that a lot. You see that a lot where people just they're asked about immigration having just become citizens, and they're like, well, yeah, I don't care about those people that came here illegal. It's like, well, come on, man. Um,
Yep.
yeah. Well, let me ask you one last thing. Is that okay?
Okay.
And then
Yes.
I'll let you go. I think I've taken a lot of your time already.
No, this is great. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share.
Okay, so two things. So, and they'll be quick. You can answer how you want. So, how do you react to ignorance versus how do you react to understanding?
Wow. I'm learning to, it's a process for me as far as learning how to react to ignorance, especially because I put myself out there and I speak out. And I'm always surprised by the ignorance that I hear around this space. Just the questions that people ask me. I guess I'm learning because first there's a shock and there's like this sort of like abhorrent, like just shock. Like, how could you even ask that question? How do you have the audacity to say or ask me, well, aren't most people that are crossing the border like rapists? Like that's just abhorrent. Like, you actually have the audacity to ask me that question and you think that's a viable question? It just really shocks me, right? But besides the shock, I guess what I'm learning to do, because it shocks me, it shocks me and it pains me, like it actually hurts me. And it hurts me when I hear the comments people make about me, go back to your country. I mean, people write awful things. Go back to your country. You should have died on a plane ride. I think someone wrote, you should have died on your way to America. Like, in the beginning I cried a lot, and I do cry sometimes still. I cry for myself, and I cry because I think, wow, if I am already on the other side of it and they say these things to me, what are they saying to the people who are not on that who are on the other side of the bridge right now still, like, what are they saying? And that's what hurts so
And
much.
how is it affecting them? Because
Yeah,
surely they feel
exactly.
less
And
comfortable with their
so
situation.
besides being shocked and sad, what the other thing I'm learning to do is listen more and acknowledge. I thank people when they share their ignorance, because I say, you know what, if you're willing to share your ignorance and you're willing to, you're not barking at me but you're talking to me, then there's a place for us. That's a beginning of a conversation that we can have. I'm willing to have that conversation, and I'm not going to react to you. I'm going to listen to you, and then we're going to have a dialogue. And so that's kind of where I am now, where I am less, I mean, I just went through an experience where someone said something really degrading to me as a woman and an immigrant, and former undocumented immigrant. And you know what I said? My initial response was, I appreciate your feedback. And I think the person was so shocked because they thought I was going to bark right back. And I said, I appreciate your feedback. I just don't agree. And that's where I started, right? And so I would say that's how I respond to I think, how did you phrase it?
Ignorance.
Ignorance. So
Yes.
that's how I respond to ignorance now. I now acknowledge it, and then I start a conversation from there.
How
And then,
about,
yes.
yeah, the second one? Go
What
ahead.
was your second question?
So, how do you react to understanding?
How do I react to understanding? I think that I appreciate it, but that's not enough. Because I thought, initially I thought, okay, you're allies. I appreciate that. Good. We're all on the same page. Yes, yes, yes. But I realize that even allies are not, they don't necessarily, they're different. There's a different allies. Some different allies have different objectives, right? And what I learned just from a recent experience is that sometimes even allies, some allies, can still have this superiority complex where it's like, well, let me help this downtrodden person. It's not about empowering and lifting that person up, it's about taking pity on that community. That's not what we need. We don't need people to take pity on us. We need people to have empathy and to help lift us up and empower us and give us our voice. Well, not even give us our voice because we have a voice. Allow us, help us access our voice. That's what we need. We need that, not pity, not sympathy, not people looking at us like, oh, these poor downtrodden people. And so
Patronizing.
that's what I'm realizing about, you know, our allies or anyone who stands with us is that there's still opportunity to get clear with them as to how do you see me?
I think this is a very. I think what you said is great, and I've had opportunities to think about this and think, well, that's when you encounter racism. When I encounter racism, I have something that I usually say, right, which is something that's not. I'm not reacting anymore, but there was a point when I was doing that.
Sure.
But what I'm not doing is saying, well, look at these poor people. How could you say this about them? Well, change it, change that from saying, oh, they've gone through so much, poor people, to just saying from your own perspective, right? Express why this is wrong, why it is wrong to be racist, why it is wrong from your own experience being a human being. Don't push it on them. Now, the reason I ask these two questions is I think that we react to understanding, well, we react to ignorance with understanding, and we react to understanding with ignorance. And what I mean with the second one is that when you experience this, there are two things that we need to do, right? Acknowledge that the fact that they are understanding that they are on the right side of things, and be curious, how did they come to this place? How did they acquire that understanding? Because we know how we did it. How did they do it? And this can also let them know that this is great. This is great that they've come to this place. And it might push them to help other people acquire that understanding that they have. Well, I think
And
we
I
can
just want to say two things with
go ahead.
that. When I think of understanding, it's really, when I think of it, I'm considering understanding coming from allies because anyone who's walked through this journey, like there's an unspoken understanding. It's like, you know what I mean? Like you don't even have to say anything. Like you just tell me that were undocumented and DACA, and it's like you don't have to say anything else. Like I'm like our experiences, of course, everyone's experience is different, but there's an unspoken understanding at the very core of our very
A
human
camaraderie, at
connections.
least. Yes,
Right.
there's a
So
certain level of
understanding,
empathy. Yes.
exactly. So understanding, when I think about it, when you ask that question, it's really from our allies. And I absolutely agree. It's okay, how did you get to this point? And how are you seeing me? Are you understanding me from the perspective of you being my savior, my hero? Because that's not the understanding that I'm looking for. And so I think we need to challenge and question that now from now on. And I'll leave you with this one thing. One of my friends who is he's undocumented. He's an undocumented activist. I was telling him about, my experience and, this most recent experience, and where I felt like, you know, people wanted me to acknowledge them as, these allies wanted me to acknowledge them as my heroes. And I refused to do that. And, he said, I love this. He said, we're our own heroes now. We don't need other people to be our heroes. We can be our own heroes. And that is exactly what I believe is part of that next step, by us sharing our stories, our narratives, and lifting each other up. Yeah.
Well, thank you for being on. You said some amazing things, and it's been a great conversation.
Yes, I had just, thank you so much. This was very much needed for me on a just kind of a spiritual level, as well as just a mental space as well, and just social level, just to be able to connect with someone who reminds me a lot of myself in many ways. And thank you.